With birth rates dropping dramatically in Japan, a company there has announced that it is stopping production of diapers for babies. It says demand is simply not there. Instead, it's refocusing on the growing market, diapers for adults. In fact, Pampers for your parents have outsold diapers for your newborn now for about a decade. It's a surprising piece of data that shines a light on a serious problem. The number of births in Japan dropped to a new low last year, with more than twice as many deaths as new babies born. If things continue that way, Japan's population could shrink by 30% over the next 45 years. My next guest tonight has been studying Japan's futuristic solution to its demographic crisis. She's the author of the book Robo, Sapiens, Japanicus, Robots, Gender, Family, and the Japanese Nation, which explores the role of robots in Japanese culture and society. I'm pleased to welcome to the day Jennifer Robertson. She's a professor of anthropology and history of art at the University of Michigan. So glad that we could connect tonight. And before we talk about solutions, let's just talk about the situation as it is. Just how serious, and I say it's a crisis because we are always talking about, we always want to see growth. But is it a crisis, a demographic crisis that Japan is dealing with?
Demographically, yes, in terms of the number of younger people in Japan as, in contrast to the number of older people in Japan. It's interesting to note that at the height of the Japanese Empire in 1940, the population was about 78 million people, but most of them were young. And today the population is about 123 million people. And about 30% of the population is over 65. And this percentage grows to almost 80 to 90% in the rural areas, including the area of the latest earthquake in Japan in Ishikawa Prefecture on the Japan seacoast.
Yeah, so what you're saying is basically the demographic, the chart has flip-flopped in the past century. And successive Japanese governments, have they tried and been unable to encourage the people to get married and have more babies?
Very good question. Well, during the height of the Pacific War, roughly 1932 to 1945 in Japan, the government withheld birth control and also allowed soldiers to take 2-week furloughs so they could impregnate their wives, to put it directly. Today in democratic Japan, they can't do that. And so they are trying all sorts of options, giving more money to families to have children. The idea was floated back during the administration of the late former Prime Minister Abe in 2006-07 to introduce robots to the home, but that hasn't proved feasible at all. And I'm sure you're going to ask me, well, where are the robots in Japan?
Yeah, well, I was going to let our viewers know. Yeah, we started by talking about diapers for adults and for older people, and now we're talking about the robot revolution that has it happened or has yet to happen?
Well, there's a lot of mystification of robots in Japan because I think Japan is somehow ripe for the confusion of science fiction and real world, actual, tangible robots. And people tend to think that the Japanese are sharing, sidewalk space and homes and office places with robots. But that is really far from the case. Most of the robots you find, for example, in homes are small entertainment robots or household security robots. The robots that are used in elder care facilities and assisted living homes take the shape of robot bathtubs or robot wheelchairs, and also possibly the most practical robot, the robot commode. But many people have the idea that Japanese are being serviced by humanoid robots, which are not very practical at all. And I can't emphasize enough that humanoid robots are very expensive to build. They're quite fragile. Yeah. And they are not end products. Rather, they are platforms for the generation of other industries. Increasingly surveillance, and I hate to say this, the weapons economy.
Plus, we know if you've ever been in a nursing home, people who work there, they have some serious muscles. You're lifting people all the time, and we haven't seen robots doing that too successfully. Why is Japan pinning its hopes on robots instead of just simply opening its borders to immigration like many countries in the West are doing?
Well, Japan has always followed a technical solution to patently social problems, and they pursued a course of automation over replacement immigration after World War II. However, the robot revolution hasn't emerged as imagined back in the early years of this century. And so what's happening is that it's a lot easier to tweak visa regulations and visa criteria and to allow in more professional workers and also manual workers. Now, there is an estimated shortage of 60,000 to 270,000 nurses in Japan. And earlier in this century, nurses from the Philippines and Indonesia were recruited, but they had to pass a really rigorous language exam, and many of them failed, got disappointed, demoralized, and ended up leaving. So what the government is doing now is working with ChatGPT to create translation services so that more foreign nurses will be able to communicate more efficiently with Japanese doctors and nurses and, of course, their patients.
It's interesting. I know back in 2007, former Prime Minister Abe envisioned Japan as a fully robotized society by 2025. You know, that is next year. Is artificial intelligence, is it going to see the rise of the robots next year or year or two?
Yeah. Well, it depends what you mean by rise of the robots. I mean, if you're talking about surveillance and weapons, absolutely. Those are the most lucrative industries in robotics today in Japan. But, you know, Abe's former prime minister and late Prime Minister Abe's robotic vision was pretty much straight out of science fiction. And many Japanese said, this is dated science fiction. You know, it's not feasible. It's not practical. But the sensors, whether they're touch or sight, sound, that went into those initial robot experiments were all spun off into the industries that are far more lucrative today, including, you know, so-called autonomous cars, drones. The Japanese are now getting into the fighter plane market.
Yeah, that's right.
But especially surveillance. You know, ChatGPT has been called a great plagiarism machine, and it learns on data that is fed to it, but it's also streaming data. So data today is capital, and some of these companies that are creating robots that provide translation services, for example, are also collecting that data and then selling them to other parties.
Well, I mean, it's fascinating when you think about it, and it makes you wonder too, are we going to see the singularity event happen this decade or the next decade? And if so, will the merge of machine and man, will that make a difference? I mean, these are huge questions, fascinating. So glad we got to talk with you, Jennifer Robertson. Please come back, because I have a feeling there'll be lots to talk about in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was a pleasure, and I hope to come back.